Hello everyone, this is Dave here, and today I'm checking out Call of Duty World War II across PS4 Pro and Xbox One X. So, this is what a lot of fans have been waiting for. Boots are firmly back on the ground, and we're back to World War II again, a scenario that has been hotly requested by a lot of Call of Duty players. And the result is a very different looking game from last year's Infinite Warfare and indeed Black Ops 3 and Advanced Warfare before that. There are some similarities in the technology between these games, although with recent Call of Duty releases featuring a longer development cycle of 3 years, it's apparent that each of the developers have kind of branching off the engine in their own direction, basically tailoring it to their individual needs depending on the game. So Infinite Warfare ramped up post-processing and film grain to try and create a very cinematic, filmic look if you will. Whereas with World War II, these elements are kind of dialed back a bit, especially film grain. Instead, we're looking at a lot of depth of field post-processing, but the image is slightly clearer, perhaps even crisper. So with that said, how well does the game fare across PS4 Pro and Xbox One X? Well, in terms of image quality, we're looking at the 4K mode here, and both versions hand in a very smooth looking presentation. Temporal anti-aliasing is the big thing with regards to edge smoothing, and Sledgehammer Games have done a good job here. The effect provides a very smooth, clean look to the game, but kind of balancing out the amount of blurriness that's present. It's not razor sharp, but at the same time the softness is kind of managed quite well. So it's fair to say that image quality can look quite good, with the temporal anti-aliasing providing a smooth but soft appearance for the game. But how well does this translate across PS4 Pro and Xbox One X? What kind of resolution are we looking at here? Well, like with recent Call of Duty titles, World War II operates using dynamic resolution scaling. In this case, we're looking at scaling across the horizontal axis. That means both platforms hand in 2160p when looking at the vertical pixel counts. But horizontally, this number varies depending on rendering load complexity. Essentially, those pixel counts are reduced in order to allow the engine to target 60 frames per second, reducing frame rate drops at the expense of introducing a bit more softness in the presentation. Now with temporal anti-aliasing in play, it's quite difficult to get exact lock on pixel counts, and indeed we'll be taking a closer look at this when we compare the game against the PC version. But for now we can say that PS4 Pro is running at a consistently lower resolution than Xbox One X, resulting in a slightly softer image on the Sony platform. While on the One X, resolution tends to stick much closer to a full-fat 4K. So you get a boost in image quality on Microsoft's platform, although it isn't always as striking as you might expect. There's definitely an extra degree of clarity there, particularly across texture details, but with the temporal anti-aliasing providing a very smooth image, you're not looking at an extremely sharp UHD presentation on either platform. And perhaps there's another element that could be contributing to the reduced definition, particularly when closely scrutinizing the artwork. When playing, we notice what look like checkerboarding style artifacts across edges, foliage, and the actual texture details themselves. It almost looks like a kind of dithering effect in motion when playing, usually visible during big explosions or when the screen flashes red when you need to replenish your health. We're not entirely sure what's going on here, but first impressions, it almost appears like the developers are using a temporal reconstruction style technique, and perhaps the blending isn't quite handled correctly, something we're currently looking into. Alternatively, it could simply be down to some post-processing effects operating at a lower bit depth or perhaps resolution. Again, we'll have to see how these console versions stack up to the PC to find out. After all, with Assassin's Creed Origins, we saw what looked like checkerboarding on certain aspects of the game, but this appeared on the PC where checkerboarding wasn't used, so it'll be interesting to see exactly what's going on there. But in terms of raw image quality, both versions hand in a decent level of presentation for a 4K screen, with Xbox One giving you an advantage in clarity and crispness. So there's a resolution bump here on Xbox One X, but what else are we getting? Well, in terms of the core artwork, both versions are identical there, and texture filtering looks very similar as well, so there doesn't appear to be any additional higher resolution textures in play on Xbox One X. A lot of the core assets then are basically a match, and a lot of the effects are as well. Things like the post-processing, the depth of field, motion, blur, sync nicely across both platforms. But where Xbox One X does get a benefit is with regards to shadow quality and ambient occlusion. Shadows are rendered at higher resolution on the One X. They appear more solid and better defined overall, so you get more clarity and definition to these particular elements. And similarly, ambient occlusion also appears to be running at a notch higher, so indirect shading appears more pronounced on the Xbox One X, leading to slightly more depth to scenes which feature the effect quite prominently. It's quite a nice refinement here, but perhaps not exactly game changing, as these improved elements aren't always obviously visible in every scene. That said, it's worth bearing in mind that when you factor in the resolution bump, along with high quality shadows, it's not an insignificant jump. I mean, on PC, when you select higher quality shadows, this usually has a huge impact on GPU performance. And while we haven't had the time to check out the PC version yet, it'll be interesting to see just how much closer Xbox One X is to matching PC's ultra level presets. And of course, there's performance to consider as well. Both versions are targeting 60 frames per second, and the developer here has to strike a balance between increasing resolution, improving visual effects, and still hitting 60 frames per second, and that's on both consoles. So it's not a case of, hey, let's use the 6 teraflop GPU, ramp up res and effects as high as they can go. You've got to still be able to get a smooth 60 FPS update. And that of course brings me onto performance, so let's dive in. It's fair to say that when running on base hardware, Call of Duty titles have had somewhat variable levels of performance. Games like Black Ops 3 and Ghost struggled to hit 60 frames per second across both PS4 and Xbox One, while Infinite Warfare handed pretty decent results on standard PS4 and ran mostly at a flawless 60 frames per second on the Pro. And in terms of Call of Duty World War II, looking at the first 3 missions in the campaign, both PS4 Pro and Xbox One X handing great results here. It's fair to say if you're looking for consistent 60 frames per second gameplay, then both versions mostly deliver it in spades. The game feels crisp, quick and very responsive, and it really allows you to get fully immersed in the action. There's very little in the way of distractions to take you out of the experience. Even in larger action scenes where there's plenty of particle effects and explosions, the engine tends to hold to its 60 FPS target rather well. Perhaps the only thing that occasionally gets in the way is some odd stuttering. I primarily noticed this when moving from one area to the next, or when the game was loading up the next set piece. Essentially, it appears that streaming could be the cause here, with the game constantly pooling in data to fill its large maps. And as a result, it looks like sometimes this can't be streamed in quickly enough, resulting in some momentary hitches. From our testing so far, it appears that these stutters appear slightly more often on Xbox One. But that said, things are quite variable where streaming is concerned, and it could simply be down to differences in how we played the game. Even so, this is perhaps the only area of Call of Duty World War II that needs improvement, and hopefully this is tackled in a future patch. But aside from that, both versions deliver a great experience that mostly hits a solid 60 frames per second. So it's a promising start for the game on PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, and we're intrigued to see what extras the PC version brings. How close does the Xbox One X version get to delivering the ultra high-end PC experience? After all, texture quality is identical between the two consoles, and we're curious to see if asset quality gets a boost on PC, along with elements such as the effects work. And that's something we'll be taking a look at soon. But for now, I'll leave it there. As ever, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And also, if you'd like to see this footage running at its very best, then check out our Patreon page at digitalfoundry.net, where the original source file is available for download. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.
Get after them! Come on, they're on the run! Keep pushing!